Today on the Camp Owners Podcast, we are meeting with Brooke and Jeff Cheley from Cheley, Colorado Camps to talk about transitioning from one generation to the other in our camp business. I don't think it's as dramatic as the TV shows Yellowstone or Succession, but you want to listen in to their advice, insight, and stories. Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast. Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, a space for camp owners to talk about the unique aspects of camp ownership and get inspired by each other. We're going to sit down with camp industry experts, leaders, and fellow camp owners to hear how the camp dream transpired for them, learn from each other, and to discuss some of the biggest issues in the private camp industry. Hi, everyone. My name is Howie Grossinger. I am the co-owner of Camp Robin Hood, a day camp in Ontario, Canada, and Camp Walden, overnight camp in about 3 hours north of Toronto as well in Canada.
Hello, everyone. I am Kelly Shuna, the co-owner and executive director of Hidden Pines Ranch Day Camp, located in Stillwater, Minnesota. If you are looking to find and subscribe to the Camp Owners Podcast, you can either find us online at gocamp.pro/ownerspod or by searching for us in your favorite podcast app. Finally, if you're listening to this and think, oh my gosh, this is the best podcast ever for camp people, please let others know and encourage them to listen and start to follow us in their favorite podcast app.
And for us to be the best camp podcast out there, we have to thank our sponsors, Kelly. So we're going to get started by thanking our friends at Camptivities. For many of us, I'm sure in the industry, we've done a Google search. How can you help save my camp scheduling nightmare? And you come across this amazing company called Camptivities, an activity scheduler for camps by camp people. You do a little more research and you determine that this might actually work for us at our camp. And you know what? It's going to save us a lot of time. You're absolutely right, it will. Ryan and his team at Camptivities have an amazing product out there. I happen to be a user of Camptivities. Highly recommend you check them out. And if you get a chance to save yourself some time in the office, or your team's time in the office so you can get out there and be with the kids and your staff, I recommend you do that as well. If you want to learn more, visit Camptivities at camptivities.com. Set up a time to chat and discover new ways to save you time and make your camp schedule really, really awesome. Kelly, we have a great topic today, one which is actually kind of near and dear to me. My own family has owned our day camp for 60 years and completed a generational change in leadership and ownership within the last 10. We are now at the beginning, actually, of our third generation of family leadership at our camp, and we anticipate that we'll have to consider another transition sometime in the future. Our guests today are Jeff and Brooke Cheley, are the directors of Cheley, Colorado Camps, who have experienced a chapter of family transition in their camp ownership and operation, and we are excited to speak with them about their experience, lessons learned, and advice about transition in a pandemic and beyond. Welcome to the show, Jeff and Brooke.
Thank you.
So
excited
nice
to be here.
Really nice to have you. This is a really important topic, I think, to address for those of us in the private camp industry, because historically, camps have been family owned and operated throughout, history in both throughout North America. So to get some perspective from a well-established camp as yourself and your own experience will be really great. I know Kelly and I, now that we're into our 33rd episode, have been wanting to get to this topic, and so glad that we are. Like any other show, Jeff and Brooke, I thought we'd give you the floor to get things going before we get into the topic, to share your camp story. Not sure, I'm sure you've shared your story many times in the past. I don't know who goes first. I will defer to which one of you want to get the ball rolling.
I'll kick it off and then turn it over to Brooke to fill in the gap. So first, to start off, I'm excited that Camptivities is one of your sponsors. Ryan Rosen's a good friend of mine and a very smart person, and excited that he's sponsoring it. So kudos to Ryan. So Brooke and I are the fourth generation of the Cheley family to operate Cheley camps. Started by our great grandfather in 1921. He was a young man that was committed to youth development, had worked for the Y. Back in his early days, he would take a group of guys, of young men up into the hills outside of Colorado Springs, and just was focused about, creating strong young men, and then worked for the Y, and then had an opportunity to start his program on the shores of Bear Lake in 1921, and then had the foresight in 1925 to move to our current location. We're very lucky that we're on our own property and our own, we own the property rather than leasing from the national park or the national forest. So he was a dreamer and a visionary. He passed away at a young age when my grandfather, or our grandfather, was 23 years old. And so Jack, the story goes that he kind of sat down in the office at 23, recently graduating from business school from Northwestern, and had to decide, gosh, do I want to grab the reins on this business that was in the red, was losing money, and Jack really had the business acumen and the skills to grow that business and turn it into a solid business that was recognized nationally and internationally. And so he worked on that, and then my father came into the business in the late 60s, and worked with my grandfather until our grandfather passed away in 87. And then I came back in 1999. Brooke, I think it was 97 or 98. What year did you come back?
97.
1997. So, we both kind of did our own thing for a little while, and then came back to work at camp, and have worked together. I think, we've had different models. Frank kind of ran it on his own. Jack had a partner that he worked with, Ernie Altick, that was just a kind of his right-hand person. And then my dad and stepmom ran the business together for the early 80s through when we transitioned in. And so a brother-sister combo has been a little bit different than a husband-wife combo. And I think has its advantages, because when we leave the office, we go to our own homes, and we can kind of transition into our families and that focus. So that's kind of a little background. I personally grew up in Denver and then went to the University of Texas in Austin for school. So hook 'em horns. It's been a rough decade or so as for our football team, but and then traveled around the world for a while and kind of proved that I could have made it on my own, which I think was important for me to know that if I wasn't here, I could have done it on my own, and then came back here in 1999. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it with every generation. I kind of always knew that I wanted to do this, and I think that we both kind of knew that it would be nice to be doing it together. We just, in this past year, just celebrated our 100th summer. So we had our celebration planned for the fall of 2020. So we had about 1,400 people scheduled to come to this big celebration. And we did end up postponing it to this past fall. Our numbers dropped to about 800, 900, but we still did it this fall and had our celebration, and it was really great. I think by the time we went to go have it, we're having the celebration, whether it's our year-round staff staring at each other with the caterers and everything else. But it was really nice to celebrate that. And we had a big party on Saturday, and we kind of talked about, I was like, okay, we're going to do speeches, and Don, why don't you do the past? And Dad can, he likes, we all like to talk, like Howie, you said, we like to talk as well. And then I did the present, and what I kind of was drawn to in talking about the present is our partnership and just how we do make really good partners, and we get along really well. And I think that we were just, trained for this at a young age. And then Jeff talking about the future. So that's kind of how we divided it up. So anyway, yeah. And I graduated from UC Boulder, and then was a ski bum for a little bit, skied moguls for Team Breck. And then I was going to go work for CCUSA. I interviewed with them, and then a job opened up at camp that was a perfect fit for me. So I kind of came back earlier than planned. So.
Yeah, so interesting around your comments around celebrating your 100th, because I've had a similar experience. We celebrated our 75th last year, and been deciding. I love the thought of, you gotta, despite what's been happening over the last two, almost now entering the 3 years, is you got to celebrate when you can celebrate. So I think we're still planning on celebrating 75 at some point. So I'm encouraged to hear that you did it, and it didn't matter who showed up, but we're gonna do it. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that insight as well, Kelly.
Oh man, well, I think this needs to be like a 4 hour podcast if we all like to talk. But a little bit of Howie before we started, I was like, I feel like we had his intro like a monster truck, like, and today on our episode we have the Chili's, like, just so I'm sure you're very humble about it, Chili's. But as someone who is relatively new in the camp ownership world, I mean, you're just known, and so it's so exciting for me to talk to you, for us to talk to you about your transition. And I know Howie has his own transition going on right now, so he's living this. And for me, what I want to talk about amongst as it comes in, you shared a little bit about your transition, but Brooke had said you knew from a young age that you wanted to do this. And Jeff, I know you went off and did some other things and came back, but as someone who has younger children, 11, 13, 15, I think when we first bought camp, I was thinking, oh my gosh, well, one of my kids want to do this. And none of the families who have run our camp have ever passed it along. It's gone, different families have purchased it. So I am curious to know about some of that, if you always knew, because we've said things to our kids and they're like, no way. Or one of them wants to be the maintenance worker, but not be in charge. So I'm curious to know. And so now I'm acting like, teenage mom of like, oh, that's fine. You don't even have to think, like, maybe that route of don't even think they want to do it, but then they'll want to. But I'm just curious to know a little bit more about your transition story, in hearing a little bit more, Brooke, about you always wanted to do it. So did you feel like you were preparing yourself, and when did that start? And Jeff, what was that like, going away to do something else? And then was it I always knew I wanted to do this, this is a time, or was it more like an epiphany about this is the right thing for my future?
So there's a family lore that and it is true. There was a letter that was written by Frank to Jack that said, if you don't want to do this, don't do it. Sell it, find someone else to do it. But kind of with the undertone of, I want it to go on, but don't do it if your heart's not in it. And then same from Jack to Don. And same from Don to Jeff and I think we had been working for years, like 15 years in alongside Don and Carol. And Dad would sometimes say, now, if you guys don't want to do this, now, if you don't want to do this, and there was a point in time where we would get frustrated, like, I've been here, I'm sitting in this seat. I obviously am here. So it's done. I'm here. I think that we were always given the freedom to decide if it was what we wanted to do. And I also think that there is definitely a skill set that is needed in order to do it. So as we look, so Jeff has 3 boys and I have 3 girls. And they're kind of stair step. I have the oldest girl and then down to the youngest boy on Jeff's side. And I think that we give them the freedom to just be who they want to be and not try. I think that it's hard. We try not to pressure them because we do kind of have 2 that have emerged in their young age of being interested in doing it. So I think giving them the freedom and also preparing them to be let down, that not all 6 are going to be running it. But, opening the door.
Was there a conscious effort, I know just in my own experience, about, carving out, we talked a little bit about carving out your own identity, get your own professional experience perhaps beforehand and maybe simultaneously doing this. And, you have kids who are in their teens and, getting those things, were you mentored or guided? It sounds like Don and Carol were saying, like, you're going to university, pursue your passions, go there. You've got this thing called camp here. You're living it alongside us every summer, blah, blah, blah. Was that a big priority? Because I know for me, I'm a high school teacher by training. My wife's an occupational therapist. We carved out some of our own experience, but we always had camp in our lives. I'm curious about some of that encouragement, because there are people listening, I'm sure, who have either, starting to think about, the kind of guidance they want to provide their own kids, if this is at least contemplated as a generational change. So I'm curious, Jeff, maybe some of your thoughts on the whole nature of go get some professional experience, go get your degree, etc. Not that that's the be all and end all, getting a degree by any chance, but by any stretch. But I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I think our dad and our mom really, my dad definitely pushed us to be helping around camp and be involved, going off to school. I have a bachelor's in business administration, more of a focus on marketing. I look back now and wish I would have focused more on finance, just because I think there's more kind of hard skills that you learn in that major. But having that business background, I think, a lot of times people talk about, just learn how to be a good counselor and how to work with kids. And, when you're running a business, there's so many aspects of, I work with I have a bunch of friends and I'm involved in some groups of business owners of all different sizes. And a lot of the issues that we're dealing with are the same, whether you're running a summer camp or a, $50 million real estate company or $1 billion this or whatever. The transition is similar. The issues of insurance or legislative issues or staffing are pretty consistent. So I was glad that I had a marketing focus and a business focus. I think my dad, when I was a sophomore or junior, said you should take some classes on insurance and take some classes here. And I think I decided to take personal family finance pass fail because it was a really easy class and you didn't have to study hard and you could just show up for the test. But that was my 19-year-old self. But I think doing that, and then I worked for a motivational speaker for Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker, for a couple of years, and I was on the road promoting his programs. And then I worked in the golf business for a couple of years, and so proving to myself that I could have made it, and I had some skills, and also I think coming back to the business, that I was coming back with skills and some success rather than just, hey, my last name's Cheley, and so I get the job. One of the interesting things on the transition, I know we'll get more into this, but our transition probably took 10 to 12 years. And I don't think it was really over until the last person that worked for my dad had actually left, because I think we told people, hey, we're transitioning. And Brooke and Jeff are now in charge. And we had some old guard that were kind of like, yeah, whatever, I'm still going to go to Don with my questions. So I think it would be difficult for, a 21, 22-year-old to kind of be pushed into a leadership role and not have some kind of resume strength as well to gain the respect of your staff. So I'm glad we did some other things. I'm glad I did some other things and came in. And I think, Brooke was not out in the real world as long, but when she came back in, she had been a counselor for multiple years at camp and had the respect of our staff and had a vast knowledge of the national park and the national forest. And so there were skills there that she brought in that you're not going to get at school or a training class, but she brought those in as being successful in the business.
I think that old guard is a very real thing. And I felt that, I'm sure you probably did too, Howie, of once it became, I felt like my people. So everybody working at camp, I had hired and they had just worked for me. And besides the woman who'd been there for 39 years, I'll take her forever. But I think there is something to that of people coming to you. So You mentioned this a little bit with that transition. How did you go through that? Did you use an outside service or consultant or business consultant to talk you through that? Did you have a really clear, plan as far as first 5 years, 10 years, 12 years? Or is it just something that authentically your family worked through without guidance from someone outside of your family?
I think we would be the first to say that, like, it is not this beautiful, perfect picture of a transition. So I think just total disclaimer, we wouldn't be like, oh, we did it perfect. Follow our little cliff notes. I think, as you guys know, there's a big emotional attachment to running a summer camp. It's very much becomes a part of your identity. So it was messy. There was a lot of outside help. Yes, to answer your question, we've had, gosh, how many have we had? Three business consultants. Yeah, maybe four.
We've tapped into a lot of them. I mean, I think, and that was one of the I've done a couple sessions on family transition planning. And one of my suggestions always is the outgoing generation and the incoming generation need to be involved in choosing that consultant together. Because we did work with a lady named Kathy for many years, and it was kind of, my dad chose her. She was it just felt like it was kind of my dad's representation. And she definitely helped us get a lot of things done and was very effective in a lot of ways. But there was just this feeling that it was the outgoing generation's person. But I think you have to reach out to the experts in this area. And the other thing, I think I've had as much support and growth and advice from people in other family businesses. As I said before, I don't care if it's a cheese business, a trucking business, insurance business, a real estate business. There's so many of the same things going on to kind of say, gosh, how are you guys dealing with this? How are you communicating? How are you working with your father when they're staying in the business and you want to push them out? Or how are you dealing with that? So I think it's very important. A lot earlier, it's not going to be a 2-year deal. I would say Brooke and I have already started talking. I mean, we've probably got 10 more years before our kids are in the business, really full time at the earliest. But we've probably got 3 or 4 years before we need to start having the conversations and working on it. I reached out to my dad last week and said, I think it's time for us to do a meeting with him, with all of our children. I mean, my youngest son is 9 years old. He won't comprehend any of this. But I think for him to hear from our dad, hey, here's the deal. The 6 of you, it's not the business's responsibility to fund all 6 of your lives and be this financial backdrop for everybody. If you work in the business, you will be financially rewarded if you run a quality business. And if you're not involved, your family will take care of you. But I think our family history for years has never been to create something where all of the members of the family receive their dividend check every year and live high on the hog type thing.
Yeah, lots of amazing perspective. Brooke, I totally agree with. It's not clean. It's messy. I'm someone who married into an established camp family and played the role of giving up a career to join my wife in the family business. And you're right, transition within family business, and particularly in our camp industry, it takes time. Jeff, you're so right when you referenced, you have to establish a certain amount of street cred within the organization, both internally and externally, because even as we were in the sort of the 12th year of what was probably a 15-year transition, people were still calling who always spoke to Sari's dad and said, I'm going to just talk to Larry. And Larry would say, I don't take these calls anymore. And so there had to be education, right? You probably went through a huge, I reflect, there's a huge education around transition too. So I can totally identify, and I think that's really great advice, because the person who's the incoming generation, I think it's a responsibility of the outgoing generation to carefully craft where that person is going to land. And we all know, and you'll know it soon, Kelly, because your kids are growing up at camp. There's a lot of undeserved pressure that comes with being the child of a camp owner director, even if you contemplate taking over. And well before that, it may just be the role you get at camp and how you get it. And we all worked a little harder, I think, because of our name and those things. And so I think that's good stuff too. The outside consultant stuff, yeah, I think that's really, good advice, whether it's establishing a go-to person that both sides, I'll use the word sides for lack of a better description, since you're still family, but you are sides, that there is a financial commitment the incoming is making to the outgoing, and it has to, aside from the emotion, I remember having my own accountants who was doing our own evaluation, versus what mom and dad were, suggesting that we go into. So there are lots of good things to unpack, maybe a specific session using, Jeff, your finance and business stuff around, the things you can do. But all that stuff really, really resonated with me for sure. Kelly, any other thoughts? Anything resonated with you related to Brooke's and Jeff's recent comments?
So much, but to parse it down, what I think I really like that, Jeff, you talked about, and it will impact both of you, is that sitting down with your kids even now, because although this is a little bit different, my husband has a family business, and it's complicated and it's messy, and he is running it, but the siblings are all on the board, so he's more boss-ish versus brother, and it's a complicated dynamic. And I don't know for sure, but I don't think that his mom sat down with all of the siblings and talked about that. And I appreciate that perspective, and I think that's a great move, no matter how old they are, to just be setting the tone for that language of, you don't have to do this, but if you want to do this, here's what that would look like. And this isn't something that will just support everybody no matter what, because I think that passion is important, and that desire to do that matters, especially as you get down in the generations. So I think it's never too early, right, to talk about that stuff and have it as an open conversation. And so I really like that you're thinking about that, and that you're involving your dad, but the two of you and all of the kids, and I'm sure your spouses as well.
Was there ever, sorry, I was just going to ask, just, and you can answer this in a moment, but just, I want you to go with your thought, but was there a moment in time where the previous generation officially declared that you guys are now running the show kind of thing? Or, and I'm just before, or was it just this osmosis thing that just sort of happened, and internally you knew what was happening, but the public sort of who knew you, your alumni knew, of course, Jeff and Brooke are doing this. I'm just curious, maybe you can address that, but I don't want to cut you off from the thought I think you were going to share.
Well, I'll share that and then answer that. I mean, there's so many documents with a good consultant, and we didn't finish all of them, but there's, creating a family charter and really talking about, like, what does the family stand for? Not the business, but I think in earlier generations, third generation, it was kind of family business. They were the same, and it was very muddy on what that looked like. And we're really trying to separate where there's this business that two members of our family lead, and then there's a family, and they're totally separate. And the family can get together for Christmas, and the family can get together for Thanksgiving or go on vacation together. And that's a family trip. And then there's the business. And if we do a meeting with the business, that's we're going to talk about the business, and that's all. And the business is going to pay for where that meeting is. When the family goes on vacation, the family pays for that, and it's totally separate. And so creating that divide, I think, is important and something we're working on. But I mean, a family charter, there's, a lot of stuff that we're still working on as far as like, an employment plan. What do you have to do as a member of the family to be considered for employment? I've heard in the past of companies that have said you have to work for a company and be promoted twice before you're eligible to work at camp. You need to work for at least 2 companies. You need to have at least this much. You need to have these degrees. And I think that's helpful. It's funny, I'm in a business organization, and every now and then there's a family business group, a part of that. And people will send out, does anyone have a great, example of a charter or a comp plan or whatever? And rarely does someone offer a great one, but you'll have 3 or 4 people that will comment and say, I'd love to see what anyone sends in. Yeah, add me to that list. Yeah, add me to that list. So I think it's not easy to figure those out. So that was one thought. And then as far as I think we tried to have a couple of those. I remember a meeting in my grandmother's house where my dad handed Brooke and I the baton. They went out and bought like a nice looking baton, like kind of, okay, we're passing the baton. And it was a great gesture, but I don't know if there was a noticeable change right after that. I always peg the summer, I think it was 2006, our younger son, or our younger brother, graduated from high school that year, that spring, and then my grandmother passed away. Our grandmother passed away the second week of the summer of that summer. And so those 2 events kind of helped us transition from the ask and then do segment or area of transition to the do and then tell part of the transition, because my dad was busy. They were up in Canada for a graduation. He was busy dealing with his mother passing away. And so he was very, he was busy, and we were kind of thrust into, hey, we got to make decisions, and we can't really ask, hey, do you think this is going to work? We got to move forward. So that was really a time when we kind of made that. And that was 3-4 years into the conversation. So, and I thought we were kind of well on our way. And then, as I said, I can't remember when Ruth Ann left, our food service manager left in the early 2010, 12, 13. And when she left and the new person came in, I thought, wow, we just took a step towards being closer to done with this, because we have a food service manager that looks to Brooke and I as the leaders, not back to my dad, even though we're the ones with the quote unquote title. So you can tell people, I think we told a lot of people, hey, we're, Brooke and Jeff are in charge, and our older families are like, yeah, whatever. So anyway, Don, I have a question. Yeah. So I think it's important to, I still remember one of our consultants saying, you need to set a date. And my dad would jokingly say, well, we're going to set a date to set the date. Instead of kind of, okay, planning it out, this year you're going to take over the financials, and next year you're going to meet with the insurance company, and the year after that you're going to set pricing, and kind of what those sides of it are. But then the emotional side is so much bigger than all of the process side of it.
I think that's where outside people are key, because they're pushing. I mean, I'm sure it was an outside consultant to come up with the idea with the baton. I still have the baton, and my husband would joke about it for years that, wait, didn't he pass the baton? What about the baton? And I can't remember what year that was, but I think that the outside consultants are really pushing, like, okay, you got to keep this going, set the date, keep it going. And I kind of a little bit about the consultants. I feel like every one of them kind of had their own little just mark on the transition process with, like Jeff said, the family charter. And really, my aunt has been a really key part of that. She tells family stories of them being at Thanksgiving and Jack sitting them down and saying, okay, sign this paper. And, while the turkey, I mean, she always talks about why the turkey's in. And we've gotten a lot better about just dividing those things and separating them. And then I think our latter consultants, when it was time for them to retire, we're the ones that are like, okay, you need to step away and not be there physically, and set the date. I was talking to another camp director in California, and she was kind of asking of my advice, and I was like, well, does your dad have a title? And she said, no, he doesn't have a title. And I was like, that's the first thing you need. He needs a title. He needs, like, director emeritus. That's number one. And then I think that the second thing in going into this next phase of it is make sure that you're filling that void. So in her case, her dad has a very big part of like the singing at camp. And when you can fill that void, it makes it easier for them to leave. We just had one of our key maintenance guys come back to us after kind of coming and going. And I think it's just made dad feel a lot better about the facility piece. That's his baby. He was never one to like sit down and know kids' names and sing songs or any of that. The facility was his baby. So I think just filling that allows them the freedom and the comfort of moving on.
Did you use the consultants at all with what your roles would be? Or was that just something natural? Because it sounds to me like Jeff has more of the business finance piece, and Brooke, you may be more of the camper staff experience piece. So did that just naturally unfold, or did you intentionally have those conversations about, okay, Jeff, what do you want to take charge of and what do I want to take charge of?
I would say it naturally unfolded with us, just because that's we do have a good partnership because we just have different strengths and weaknesses. The what is your role came in with Dad and Carol, and that's been messy. When you have this important role and then it's your director emeritus, yes, you can put a name to it and a label, but it's tricky to know what your role is when you're at camp and after you've retired.
Yeah, we've had to navigate that as well, and that really resonates with me, Brooke. I think that Sari's dad and mom have been fixtures at camp, just like many of our previous generation, and I think the title was very important. And in a day camp environment like ours, we've been able to sort of transition into the things that they like to be still part of in the operation, that is a legacy piece, that is warms everyone's heart, from the alumni piece and the staff who've known them, still recognizing that they're not at camp necessarily every day. My father-in-law, as an example, has been widely known as not an entertainer at camp by any stretch, but more of an administrative, behind-the-scene, logistical sort of leadership kind of person. But busing at day camp was his thing, and so he is 80 years old, and he still visits camp and stands in the bus line, and all of our staff respect that Larry's going to move a bus out or do something, and it's just been sort of this wonderful thing where the presence of the grandfather of camp, so to speak, is still present. And we recently created some routing busware software that we affectionately named after him. So it's called Larry. So instead of Siri or Alexa, we have Larry, which is our new routing software. So to your point, I think that as and this is all about family dynamic and generational relationships and moving on, but we have found a sweet spot in our own situation to be able to morph that in and make it comfortable, respecting the fact that and they're so respectful of the fact that their daughter and son-in-law are now in charge, which is really interesting. I really have to ask one question. We did a podcast earlier in the season where Sari and Peter were on the show, and we got to talk about working with your spouse, your partner. And so I'm wondering, as your brother-sister relationship has evolved, maybe you can talk about the uniqueness of because so many camps are identified with spousal sort of relationships and those kinds of things. I'm assuming your brother-sister relationship is better than ever now, and the spats you had when you were 10, they don't exist anymore. Obviously going to different homes, as Jeff, you mentioned, helps. I just wondered if you wanted just to comment on that stuff a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still harboring. I think I was 12 or 13 years old, and I'd spent 2 hours setting up these dominoes all over the front entryway, on the marble of the front entryway. And it was like this masterpiece. And Brooke walked around the corner and kicked one of the dominoes and knocked the whole thing down. So I know. Can you believe it? No, we get along really well, and I think part of it is that if one of us really feels strongly about something, usually the other person is willing to kind of say, you know what, you feel very strongly about this. I respect you as a leader. I respect that your intentions are in the right place. And so I don't have the same, I don't feel as strongly. So I'm totally willing to go that route. And I don't think I can't think back over the 20 years we've worked together where we've had a situation where it's like, gosh, I really don't agree with you. I think we believe that we both have the best interest of the business in mind when we're moving forward with that. I think it's going to be interesting when you take 6 cousins and you have 1 or 2 of them working together, or 3 maybe, but I don't think the business is big enough really, unless we started expanding and had other offerings, to have more than 2 people working in the business. And so then, we're going to have to talk about what does that look like when, it could be 2 of Brooke's children, it could be 2 of mine, it could be 1 of each. All of those situations are going to look very different going forward. And so how do we manage that? How do you manage if you want to work in the business, but you don't have the right skill sets, or there's not really a place? We're both in positions that make sense for owners to be in. Would you have an owner, what's the difference if one of the owners is the head facility person, or the ranch manager, or HR, or enrollment? There's all these different positions, and some of them mesh better with being also in an owner position and having the full view of what's going on. So I think it is very helpful that we kind of go our own way at the end of the day. And, I can go home and complain to my wife about something I'm dealing with at the office, and kind of keep her abreast of what's going on. But there's that separation where Don and Carol kind of had to be 50-50 in the relationship, but then my dad was the CEO. And how do you manage that when you have to make a call and you may have a different opinion than your spouse that's supposed to be equal? So I don't know, Brooke.
I think we have a lot of respect for each other, and there's never been a power struggle. If I was in charge of our finances, we would not maybe be here still. So we would be a kind of mess. And I think if Jeff was in charge of like the social, emotional side of the parents and the campers, there would be times where, how it is. You get into these tricky, impossible situations, and Jeff's like, "You got this." Yeah, I got this. And like about a year ago, he made me fill out this thing for him in one of his men's groups, and just like feedback. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll do that. That'll be super easy." And then I got to it, and I was like, "This is kind of hard." But I think one of the things that this is something that I respect in people, and I respect this in Jeff. There was some social emotional situation, and we kind of handled it. It was in the throes of the summer, and I kind of came into his office and I was like, "You didn't handle that well." And he was like, no, I didn't. And I just love that about a person that can't be like, "Oh, well, it was their fault," or, whatever. It's like, no, I didn't handle that well. So I think that we have a lot of respect for each other and know what the other person brings to the plate and value that.
I love so much what just happened right there. Like watching that of the 2 of you acknowledging in each other, and I could see your faces like, "Yep, they're right." And then, and thinking about my kids, if they ever did it together, like that's what I would want. So I'm sure that, your dad, they would be so proud. I just think I don't know, I'm Howie if you felt that way, but I think that's what you hope. And that it seems like you really have crafted that, or that dynamic authentically really works, because I could just see it in action. And I love that. That was awesome.
Thank you.
I wanted to, so I'm a note taker, and I know we had one other question that we wanted to ask. So I wanted to recap any advice. So I want to list the advice that I've taken down in my notes, and then I want you to tell us if I missed anything. So just advice for like other camp owners and families. So some of the things that stuck out that I noted were both parties being involved with picking a consultant, And I like that you said like different consultants brought different things to that process. So it wasn't a bad thing necessarily to have a couple, but that both parties involved, employment plan, maybe that it talks about if families want to be involved or work for the company, that you have maybe some things that you want to work for someone else and for how long. Talking about recognizing the ask and do stage versus do and tell. Talking to other family businesses, even if they're in the cheese or sanitation, having a title for the outgoing family members and filling that void and them having that trust and feeling that it's been filled, and then just thinking about skill sets and really do incoming generations have those skill sets, and that is there a place for them? So anything that I missed in kind of recapping the things that you mentioned today?
That's a great list. I mean, I'm looking through my notes from other sessions that we've done, and I think that's a lot of what we talked about. I mean, other things that we've talked about with people is both generations need to have hobbies. I think it's important for the outgoing generation, like Brooke said, to kind of fill that void and to find another way to create their identity. So joining boards or nonprofits or something else where they can still be involved, but if they can find outside ways to kind of fill their bucket, then they're not looking to camp to fill that. And I think for us looking forward, I want to develop my own hobbies and my own involvement so that when it's time for Brooke and I to step off, there's something else there that we're excited about. I've seen friends of mine that have retired and started taking painting lessons or learning a new language or, getting very involved in a nonprofit, and that kind of that gives them that outside rather than we're just kicking you out and, sit at home and wake up and do yard work all day. So I think that has been helpful. I think understanding, like you said, that you'll work and work and work on it, and it may not move forward, and then suddenly an outside force will move the needle and you'll make that jump. We did when we picked the most recent consultant. We had two of them come in, and the whole family, members in the business and not in the business, we all sat in Brooke's living room, and one guy came in and talked to us for about 45 minutes. We asked some questions, and then this lady came in and talked to us for 45 minutes, and they left, and we sat around and talked about it and said, okay, everyone vote. And it was unanimous on who we wanted to work with, which I think really helped give her more power and more just clout in working with the family, because it was not anyone's person. We all chose this person. And so I think that was very helpful. And then I think understanding for the new generation coming in that you need to find your team and you need to figure out how you're going to create that team. There's going to be some uncomfortable situations where you may need to get rid of someone that was a long-standing staff member with the outgoing generation because they're not willing to buy in on the new generation. I think we have a different mentality. I've talked with our facility guy that recently came back. I think my dad put a lot of weight in work ethic. And that was kind of the key thing. People that were on that team had amazing work ethics and they would bust their butt. There were a few of them that may not have been the most friendly. They got stuff done, but we had a facility guy that was pretty cantankerous and you didn't mess with him. And I think Brooke and I put more weight into you're going to be a member of the team and you're going to contribute. And you're going to be you're going to be in there for the organization. We may have some people on our team that maybe don't have, if you could rate a work ethic, their work ethic may not be as high, but their connection with everybody on the team is higher. And I don't think one is better than the other, but I think going in, we have to realize that that we have to figure out what is important to me, and are these people going to match what our team is going to have. So I think that, and we're going to do it differently. I think that was the other thing. We would do things that my dad would do them one way, or Don and Carol would do them one way, and we would do them different. But really, both generations need to figure out, how are we going to define success? If the beds are full and the reputation is strong, does it really matter how we get there? Or what are the benchmarks that the organization is going to use to figure out is it working? The beds were full when Don and Carol were running camp, and the beds are full that Brooke and Jeff are running it. We're going to get there a different route, and that's okay. So.
And it's all about adaptation, right? Each generation has to adapt to a new style of work, a new, people's approach to the way they view work, or the way they view bosses, or the way they view owners. And Jeff, I can totally relate to your story. It's not unlike the new GM of a sports franchise who wants to hire his own coach, right? And we're seeing that now in a period of time in football, for example, right, with lots of change. And I can tell you firsthand, the very first order of business that my wife and I, which in our relationship, I'm the one who carries out this responsibility, but we did let go the facility manager as part of the first order of business when it became official that my father-in-law wasn't in charge. And just because, and not that the facility wasn't taken care of, and not because weren't safe or anything like that, but the vision of our style of leadership and members of our team, there was in our determination and incompatibility of where we were going. So we had to make some decisions. So yes, I think that is a very, very important thing to consider, how you're going to manage those topics in terms of personnel. I'd also like to say one of the things that I think didn't get said out loud, but I think is a theme throughout of both of your comments, is transparency and communication about, this is what we're about, this is what we do, and these are the steps that we're going to take to get wherever we get. And, Brooke, you talked about transitions are messy. And, just to put maybe an asterisk on that is that, I'm sure if you're anything like me and my situation and what we're, you made notes about your own experience for when it's time for your kids and the cousins that, yeah, this was great, but you know what, I'm going to do this part a little differently. And we're currently doing that. And my own example is my 29-year-old daughter just joined our team full time, an established professional teacher, speech language pathologist. But we knew we weren't just going to make the announcement to the public before we got her brothers together and we all had a family meeting. And you can't underestimate or not appreciate the importance of that communication, that transparency for whatever it leads to. Maybe her brothers in the future will express interest. I don't know. But the point is that every step of the way, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, is a real theme of what you guys, I know Jeff, you guys talked about this communication. So I just wanted to add that. Jeff, one of the things that intrigued Kelly and I was, getting your thoughts, and of course, Brooke, yours as well, about the impact of the pandemic on transitions, your experiences, the people you're talking to, how this, I talk to a lot of camp owners, right? The pandemic has hit. I might want to get out 5 years early. This has aged me or aged my experience. So I'm curious, in the time that we have remaining, your thoughts on the pandemic, transitions, and some of the advice or the things you guys are thinking about related to what we're still dealing with.
I was thinking about that earlier because I think Jeff mentioned when our grandmother died in the middle of the summer. And I think, these past 2 years, I know there has been dozens of times that Dad has said, I don't know how you guys are doing it. I don't know how you guys are doing it. So I think it was a little bit of that last push of really recognizing how much energy you need to do this job. So I think that it did kind of play a role. And I think we're really proud of the way that we have managed this pandemic. Our story is that we're pressing on until about June 6th of 2020. And we can do this. We were working our butts off to try and figure it out, webinars, and we had about 40 people on staff at the time at camp doing the work to get camp ready. And we had to test, we were one of the first, our industry was one of the first to jump into the pool of kind of, surveillance testing or pool testing. And so we tested everybody, and Jeff and I came back as being positive on like June 7th. And so it was June 8th that we canceled our traditional summer because our ER doctor was also like, if we have an outbreak and we have to get everyone home, we have kids from all over, obviously, and how do we get everyone home? So we canceled our traditional summer camp, and then we could not stop problem solving. We just couldn't stop. We were on this roll. And then we opened up a camp for kids of Colorado. So we served 225 kids in 2020. And Jeff didn't have symptoms. I later had symptoms, but so we ran that, and it was funny because in that time, Dad is 80. So it was another moment of like, you can't just be walking around here. Like, you really shouldn't even be here. And I remember one day we didn't have guests, we didn't do tours, and he's like, my neighbors are coming up for lunch. I was like, they're what? We don't need your neighbors here. I was nervous because he's at the age where, so I think that it's just another kind of way that he has been proud of us and also recognized, like, I'm done, and I'm so glad I'm done. And we didn't lay anyone off. We have our same team. So that would be my input on that.
I would say, I think a couple things that came out of it. And I think if people are listening to this that are in a family business and have siblings that are not in the family business, there needs to be some recognition that there is a level of commitment if you're a family member working in the family business that is hard to really put your finger on. I have a lot of friends that are heads of schools or work in education that are exhausted, that have left that industry. When you're a member of the family, you can't just get tired and decide you're out. I mean, yes, we could, but it would be a lot harder. So there needs to be some recognition that when you come back in, you're kind of committing that you're going to be here and you're going to kind of take the reins. So I think we also, camps and probably most family businesses probably have this attitude that, hey, we've been successful for 50, 60, 80, for us, 102 years. You're always going to continue to be successful, and you're just kind of holding the torch. You're not really having to save the business. And when we closed, I remember sitting in my house by myself because I'd tested positive, thinking, oh my gosh, we were 3 months away from celebrating our 100th year. Are we even going to weather this financial storm? Because we just cut off a year's worth of revenue, and we still had 40% of the expenses to pay our year-round staff and to feed the horses and to pay the property taxes. So it was definitely a stressful time, and I think it helped us realize you can't just put, okay, you're the next generation. Here's, you hold the torch because we've been successful for this long. We'll always be successful. That may not be the case. I think there were a lot of camp people that may be ready a little earlier. And for us, we've talked about it for the last 5 years we've got a smaller group of camp directors that we kind of chat with a couple times a year. And we've talked about, we may need to have kind of a bridge person, because, camping takes a ton of energy and effort, and you've got to be on. And for me at 60 years old, I'm not going to be ready to take on the stress. And I may need a 30, 35, 40-year-old that is the CEO, because 10 years from now, I don't think I'm going to be ready to turn it over to, even if it's our oldest two kids. Brooke's daughter is almost 16. My son is almost 13. I don't know if I would be comfortable having a 23 and a 26-year-old take the reins. So we may need to find someone that gets compensated well and say, you know what, you're in charge. We're still going to be around and involved, but we're not going to be in the CEO seat. And you're going to do it for 3 or 4 years. And unfortunately, after 3 or 4 years, and once we decide our younger children are ready, then, it may be time for you to move on. So yeah, I think it has, to echo what Brooke said, I think it has raised the respect and the comfort for my dad, especially our dad, that, okay, they got it. So
That may end up being a really great job experience. So for someone who wants to run a company, in camp, you do it all. So that, as hard as that will be, you mentioned that to that person, I also think that really could be a phenomenal experience to give someone within your business, and then for them to spread their wings and move on. So, well, speaking of paying your money bills, we got to pay our money bills here with our last sponsor before we move on to our inspiration. This is hard, Sheely's, to stop. I feel like we could talk for a really long time, but we need to be concise with our time. So our last sponsor that we want to give a shout out to is Camp Brain. They have been not as long as the Chelys in the camp industry, but since 1994, with 45 plus dedicated staff to meet your every need. A couple of things that really stick out to me during this Camp Brain introduction and experience is the cabinizer, how you can clone a season versus, man, did I put that kid in the same cabin or group in session 1 and 2 so that you can clone that? That is huge. What a huge perk. The automatic SIB discount, how it calculates for you and you don't have to do that. And just the ease of parents registering all of their kids at the same time versus one by one. So it's a huge shout out to some of the features of Camp Brain. If you are interested in learning more yourself, you can find out more at campbrain.com or call 866-485-8885. Howie, inspire us.
All right. You're always an inspiration, Kelly. We've been doing this a long time now. Yes, we want to close out our episode with getting some inspiration from our guests. And Kelly and I will share what's inspiring us these days. It can be a book, it can be an article, a podcast, a quote, a person that's inspiring you these days, whatever it is, but something for us to think about. We will make notes in the show notes about the inspiration you're about to hear. And you know what? Why don't we get Kelly? Why don't you start us off and set the tone for inspiration today?
Oh, the pressure, Howie, but I'll take it. I have a podcast to share. I listened to it quite a while ago, but I think it is so applicable to this topic. It is from our own Audrey Monkey, who is a West Coast camp owner and part of Wake. Shout out to Wake and Audrey. But she has a podcast called Sunshine Parenting, if you haven't checked it out. But episode 101 is with a man named Richard Watts, and he wrote a book called Entitlemania. And he speaks to so much of what we've talked about in family business and ensuring, some best practice in that process, and that the passion is there and how we can do that for the next generation. So if you're interested, I thought that was phenomenal. So episode 101, Sunshine Parenting podcast with Audrey Monkey.
And a guest on the Camp Owners podcast in the first season. So we just thought we'd throw that
nice.
out. She's the real deal as well. Brooke, how about you go up next?
So I just went to Mexico with my husband's family, and we were talking about New Year's Eve and 2022, and my sister-in-law wanted us all to come up with a word that we would live by that in this next year. And so I really gave it a lot of thought the whole week and came up with grounded. I have 2 words, sorry, grounded and clarity. I think that the world has just been so disorienting. And I think that this past summer, we had some really tricky situations that were thrown at us. And so I really want to go into the next summer just being really grounded and clear. And I'm also a huge Brene Brown fan. So she has her new book.
Yes. Kelly and I get vulnerable all the time on this podcast, Brooke. So welcome to the club.
Yes.
Jeff, what's on your mind?
Shout out to Camp Brain. First of all, we've been Camp Brain users since 2005, and they do an amazing job and great support. So fun that's one of your sponsors. A couple things. One, a friend of mine, I'm in a men's group that meets every other Wednesday, and we started kind of reading a couple books a year. And a friend of mine just suggested reading a book called The Common Rule: Habits of Purpose for an Age of Distraction by a gentleman named Justin Early. So it's weird to suggest something I haven't even started yet, but I was excited just about what the book was talking about. And the friend of mine that suggested it is just a a brilliant person, and I know put a ton of thought into a book that would have impact. So that was the first thing. And then the other, I think, inspiration, my son is a hockey player. And so I was up this morning at 5 a.m. to take him to a 6 a.m. clinic at an outside rink here in Denver. And I think what inspires me is that he's found this passion that is his own, that it's something that he can be proud of, and it's something that he's putting this dedication into. And whether he plays hockey in high school, college, wherever, I think he's learning how to commit to something and be dedicated to it. And just the experience of getting up early and, to show up to school at 8:30 with an hour workout at an intense level. It's just kind of helping shape who he is. So he inspires me on how committed he is to that. So
way to go, Dad. It starts with somebody. It's good role modeling, us camp owners, Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I'd like to share my inspiration this week as a book, kind of tied to my sort of thoughts I've been mentioning on previous episodes around the challenge of staffing for all of us. Here's an apropos book title for our staff: Finish What You Start. The name is the name of the book. It's by Peter Hollins. And essentially, it's a messaging around adopting the mindset that finishing equals learning. That we're in such a state of perfectionism with young people today that often, if they're not getting it right away, they give up on it or they stop it. And it's just a really great book around how process, and even if you create something or finish something that isn't what you expected, that's okay, because it helps you to the next one. And so the book is called, once again, Finish What You Start. Check it out. It's pretty good. So there you have it. Great inspiration. Kelly, to you.
Awesome. All right. If our wonderful listeners are looking to get a hold of us after this, I'm sure that they will, if you're willing to take their inquiries, how can they get a hold of everyone? So Howie, will you first share how people can get a hold of you?
Absolutely. If you want to get a hold of me directly at howie@camprobinhood.ca, the CA for Canada. Yes, reach me by email.
All right. And my email is Kelly with a Y at hiddenpinesranch.com. Jeff, how can individuals get a hold of you?
Both of our emails, Jeff Cheley, which is CHELEY at Cheley.com, and then Brooke Cheley at Cheley.com. So always happy to chat about family transition and what's going on and what's worked for us and what hasn't. And we want to be very honest about it, because it is it's a process, and as Brooke said, gets messy at times, but it's also, I think we can all learn from each other too. I think we're always willing to help someone else through it, because I think we learn as much as we contribute. So.
Absolutely. And your emails are in our show notes. So if individuals want to see the links for inspiration or your emails, it's all in our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. You can find all the resources that I mentioned. We hope you enjoy this. I know I enjoyed it. I always get something out of each episode. So I think I speak for Howie as well. Cheley's, this was amazing. If you, I just want to throw out there, if you feel like bringing those batons, like the national conference, maybe a little toss and twirl routine, so just going to throw it out there, pack those up. But really, in all seriousness, this was, I loved it. I loved it for my own future, and I think for others to listen to. So a little longer than we normally do, listeners. I hope you can hang with us for this whole episode, but that was lovely. So thanks for your time, both of you, and we'll see you on the next podcast episode.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.